Our next speaker, we don't need to introduce. I think this is a bit of payback. About 6 weeks ago, I coerced Tom into participating in a functional restoration workshop that was hosted by the Forest Service and West Virginia University back in Pittsburgh, of all places. And Tom agreed to do that. So apparently from that, he thinks that I'm an expert on functional restoration and that I can come and make a worthwhile presentation this morning. I'll be honest, this is a bit of a new topic for me as well. And one of the reasons that we had this workshop in Pittsburgh was to start to gather some dialogue and some information about what it is and how we can use it to our advantage, and how it might pertain specifically to work that's being done on Forest Service ground, but it's applicable to much more than that. So although I don't have too much information on my resume, I am tall. So I think we'll be okay today. I thought maybe I'd start off just by going through some definitions. As I was starting to prepare this, I thought, maybe I even need to go back and just look at some of these words that were kicking around your functional and restoration, and what are the definitions. So I pulled out my Merriam-Webster, and the definition for function is an action for which a thing exists. And I think we can see how that could pertain to plants. And it implies a purpose, something that that thing is intended to perform. If we think about plants, I think we can envision a few things that would fit into that definition. And then if we look at the word functional, it's used to contribute to the development or maintenance of a larger whole, which in our case would be a plant community or an ecosystem or a landscape across a much larger area. And it's performing a regular function. So then I flipped over to restore. And the first definition of restore is to bring back into a former or original state, which I think if we think about restore, that's probably the first thing that pops into our mind as well. And then if we look at the word restoration, it's the same thought, bringing it back to a former condition. But I thought the second definition was a little bit more interesting, restoring to an unimpaired condition or an improved condition. So not only can we take it back to a former unimpaired condition, but we could take it to an improved condition as well. And then under restoration, we have all of those R words that we like to use. And those R words are really more goals that pertain to restoration. Rehabilitation, reconstruction, reclamation, reforestation, remediation, all of those R words. And basically those words are giving us some context across the continuum where rehabilitation would be restoration with a light touch, where we don't need to do very much to bring a system back to what we perceive it needs to be, versus reclamation, where that would be more on the idea of mine reclamation, where we have a very disturbed site that's going to take a lot more work. And so some examples across that continuum, if we're thinking about rehabilitation, maybe that's reintroducing chestnut blight resistant trees back into our eastern forest. We already have healthy eastern forests, they're just missing their chestnuts, so if we put chestnut back in, we've rehabilitated them back. Reconstruction might be, we had forested land, it was converted to agriculture, and now we're putting it back into trees through afforestation. And then mine reclamation, where we're basically starting over from scratch. Just a few photos to illustrate that. Fire rehabilitation, maybe we're planting seedlings or shrubs or something to kickstart succession in a relatively undisturbed ecosystem, except that it's been burned. Repairing and reconstruction, where we're putting back in poplars or willows that were removed either by indiscriminate logging or through some other disturbance. And then roadside reclamation or mine reclamation, where we're basically starting work from scratch. So then if you try and tie those two words back together, functional and restoration, you can come up with a couple of definitions as well. One being to bring back or improve a condition in which the regular functions that contribute to that ecosystem are present. We're going to talk a little bit more about what those functions might be in just a minute, but that's not a bad working definition. And then I like this one too. Redirecting an ecosystem to a more useful composition or structure. And I like that word redirecting, maybe because it's another R word that we like to use, but I like that thought of redirecting, where we're just changing the course of what that particular ecosystem is at the moment. One of the things that came out of our day-and-a-half conference in Pittsburgh was that functional restoration, and you'll get a better feel for it as I go along here, but one of the nice things about it is that it has wide applicability. It can be used for terrestrial systems that we would be most familiar with, but it could also be used for aquatic systems too. whether it be cutthroat trout or salmon or some other aquatic system. It has applicability there as well. And one of the other things, and we'll talk about this a little bit more as the talk goes along, is that it's an intersection of social criteria as well as biological criteria, and the two really aren't separable. And even though I'm a forester and plant person, I really don't like to delve into that social component, I guess I'm going to have to change my ways and learn how to do that. And then functional restoration also looks at both a vertical and a horizontal dimension to this process. So vertical being we start with soil and all the properties of soil, and we move up through biotic crusts or organic matter levels into an understory setting to shrubs to trees, if that be the case, and then also horizontally across the landscape. So what are some of the functions that we're talking about here? Well, they can be divided into two camps. We can have biological functions and we can have sociological functions. And the biological functions, there's probably hundreds or maybe even thousands. And here's just a smattering of a few just to give you an idea of what we're talking about when we talk about functions that are being provided in our ecosystems. It could be mineral weathering, conversion of rock into soil, organic matter decomposition. Maybe it's a role with pollinators, either in providing them food or providing them habitat for breeding, whether it be above ground breeding areas or below ground breeding areas. Controlling erosion, providing for clear, clean, and abundant water, cycling nutrients, being adapted to fire, providing material for grazing, whether it be cattle or big game, providing habitat for other critters, energy flow, and if we're talking about forest, maybe we're talking about fiber and the production of wood for wood products. If we flip then and think about some of the sociological functions that ecosystems might provide, and these become a little bit more intangible. I mean, they're a little bit harder to really describe well, but some of these aren't too bad. Ecosystems can provide recreation opportunities, hunting opportunities, and for some people maybe those are the same. Provides for wilderness, whether it be going out and experiencing wilderness on your own or just having a good feeling inside that you know that there are wild places out there on the landscape. It could be providing for cultural heritage, providing the plant materials that are required for traditional crafts or for traditional medicines, and then just the aesthetics of a healthy-looking ecosystem. So here's just a few examples of that. We've got our pollinators up here in the left corner. Maybe we're in the southwestern United States and we're removing invasive tamarisk that's using a lot of our water from our traditional riparian zones, and we're going to replace that with willows and poplars that have a more that will give us a more natural hydrologic system. Maybe we need to go in and do some restoration in a campground to improve the enjoyment for the folks who go and are doing the camping. Maybe we're cutting timber for wood products, or we're providing habitat for big game, or maybe we have a situation like Mount St. Helens where we need to go in and do some restoration to provide for whatever the necessary need is. If you haven't been to Mount St. Helens lately, it's kind of fun to go up there now and look at the dividing line between Weyerhaeuser, where they replanted immediately after the blast, and the monument, where the natural processes are being allowed to restore that naturally. That's quite a dramatic difference when you go up there and look at it. So my brother-in-law, who's a farmer, always says nothing works as well as the original.